On a raw Maine coast, the lighthouse bell keeps time with the storm. A quiet veteran and his service dog pull a wheelchair bride from a stranded wedding car. What should be a one-night shelter turns into a reckoning. A seaplane, a power of attorney, and bags sinking under the pier. When dirty money and a hidden foundation surface, a new splice of rope ties their fates and opens the door to redemption. At this house, the storm rolled in from the open Atlantic like a wall, dragging rain across Port Harridan in sheets so heavy the harbor lights blurred into halos. The bell on the old lighthouse struck again and again, slow and stubborn, the sound carrying over the black water and the slick rock. Cole Harrington hunched into his oilskin and kept walking the pier, boots finding each plank by memory. Rook padded at his heel, a shadow with bright eyes. The dog's vest rained dark and beaded with salt. Cole made his rounds the way he had learned to breathe, steady, unhurried, never mind the weather. He checked mooring knots, took one rope in hand and tested the give. The wind shoved at his shoulder and tried to spin him, but he planted and let it pass. Rook lifted his head and tasted the air. A low sound started in the dog's chest, not a growl, not yet. Cole touched Rook's neck without looking. Easy, boy. Another toll of the bell came down from the point. Between strikes, the world narrowed to rain on tin roofs, wave slap under the pilings, and the far cough of an engine that should not have been out. Cole frowned toward the mouth of the cove. Headlights flashed on the rock shelf beyond the bait shack, too high, too quick. They jittered, cut out, came back in a sick wobble, then fixed at a tilt that made no sense. Rook broke from heel and took the pier at a run. Cole followed, not because of the lights, but because of the dog. Past the winch, around the coils of green line, down the steps to the weed-slick stones. Spray hit his face cold as a slap. The headlights sat at a crooked angle where the sand road slid onto the rock. A nose-in sedan jammed against a drift of kelp and wind-blown debris. The engine rattled and coughed. One back tire spun in place, flinging pebbles. Every now and then the whole car gave a short, tired lurch, as if it wanted to quit. The first thing he saw was lace. White lace, soaked and plastered to a window like a sea fan. The second was the chair. A wheelchair folded wrong and jammed between front and back seats, a wheel bent like a paper plate. The third was the woman. She sat in the passenger seat with both hands locked on the armrest, hair pinned in what had once been a careful twist, now blown apart and wet to her neck. A veil hung from one side, the comb askew. The dress was real, not costume white, but the heavy kind with seams and weight. The bodice beaded, hem ruined by brine. Her face was bloodless around the lips, but her eyes were wide and sharp. They tracked him the instant he stepped into the headlights. "Don't open your door," Cole said, pitched low so his voice would carry and calm. "You'll slide. Turn the wheel left. Slow." Her hands shook. She did what he asked. The car answered with a weak cough and nothing else. Rook jumped to the hood and crouched there, paws splayed, tail a wet rope, watching her through the glass. The dog's presence steadied the space between them in a way words could not. Cole tested the rocker panel with his boot. The car was wedged on driftwood and rock. The undercarriage hung, the front tires slick as eels. He looped his tow line through the frame where the metal still looked true, then hauled the other end to the bollard that served his skiff. The knot came back to him from muscle memory. Wind tried to snatch the line from his fingers, but he flattened his hands and fed it clean. "Kill the engine," he called. "Put it in neutral." She reached. The engine died, the headlights dimmed to the last of their charge, and the storm's sound moved in to fill the car's silence. He leaned his weight into the rope. It took on a living tension, a hum he felt in his shoulder and teeth. When the car shifted, it did so with a sand-suck sound. The back tire found stone. He used the sway of the wind and his own weight, stepped and braced, and the sedan began to edge backward, slow as a stubborn mule. Rook held his place until the line slapped wet against the hood. Then he sprang away, landed sure on the rocks, and circled to the passenger side. Cole gave the last, mean pull and felt the wheels free. The car rolled off the driftwood and settled level with a small, grateful bump. "Good," Cole said. "Stay put. I'm opening from outside." He took the passenger handle. It stuck, then gave. Rain came in a cold blade. Up close, he saw she was younger than he had thought, but not a kid. The kind of young that already knew better. The veil had a tear clean through the middle like a mouth. "Name," he said, because triage was triage, whether it was a battlefield or a storm. "Mine's Cole. This is Rook." "Maya," she said. "Maya Laurent." "You hurt anywhere you can't see?" "My back," she said. "But that's not new." Her eyes flicked to the twisted chair. "I can't walk far." "Then we won't ask you to." He glanced at the chair again, judged the bend, and let it be for now. "I'm going to slide you out slow. Arms around my neck when I say, not before. Rook will watch the ground." The dog had already moved to the downslope and planted himself there, ready to check any slip with a body block. When Cole lifted Maya, she was lighter than the dress suggested, but not frail. The muscles in his back remembered the lift and carry. She hissed when his forearm brushed above her hip. He changed the angle without asking about it. They took small steps. The rocks underfoot were a mean mix of algae and grit. Twice Rook shouldered Maya's knee, just enough to steady her. Twice she breathed out and kept going. He set her on the rail of the pier stairs long enough to adjust his grip. The bell from the point came again. In the pause between strikes, he heard the engine he'd clocked earlier, farther now, or muffled by rain. It was not a working skiff, and not a lobsterman coming home. Too clean a tone. He filed it. They reached the pier. Maya's hands were rigid from cold. Cole shrugged out of his oilskin and put it over her shoulders. It dwarfed her, but the heat trapped under the waxed canvas put color back in her mouth. Rook pressed his head to her thigh, then trotted ahead to the shop door and looked back, checking them both. Inside, the world narrowed to the smell of pine shavings, tar, and old coffee. The storm became a far drumming. The shop had lost power an hour ago, so he lit the big lantern on the workbench and turned the wick until a steady flame leaned into the glass. Shadows jumped on the rafters. Maya's dress dripped a small lake on the plank floor. He moved a stool beside the wood stove and packed the firebox with split oak and a twist of oily rag. Flame caught quick, bit into the heartwood, and made a sound like a man taking the first deep breath after a scare. He brought a wool blanket from the peg and set it around Maya's shoulders, tucking it close like it had weight. "Water," he said. "Then something hot if you can keep it down." "I can," she said. She meant it. Her voice had sand in it, but it wasn't the voice of a helpless person. She drank, slow and neat, no spill. Rook lay down with a heavy thump where he could see the door and the stove at once. His ears flicked with each shift of wind. Cole took the bent wheelchair from the sedan, brought it inside, and looked it over under the lantern. The axle had some life in it yet, but the rim would need truing. He set tools out without fuss and straightened what he could by hand, then with a clamp and lever. The work steadied him, steadied the room. He heard Maya's breath lengthen and smooth. "Was anyone with you?" he asked, not looking up. "When the car went off the road?" "No," she said, then amended it in the same breath. There was supposed to be. He left. Cole set the clamp down. Slow. Rook turned one ear. Left where? At the chapel, she said. And the last word almost broke. Before the vows, he said he'd circle back with the keys. I waited. I thought I could get down the coast road to a public lot. I thought I could call a car there. The rain came faster than the radar said. Cole nodded once, the kind of nod that did not excuse anyone. He put the chair together and rolled it to her. She rested her hand on the push rim like it was a familiar shoulder. Up close, he saw the pale lines of healed incisions above her hip, where the lace did not quite meet skin. He turned his head a fraction to give her the privacy of not being looked at. "Can you manage transfers?" he asked. "With a frame or a spot?" "I've got a frame," he said. "And a ramp I can throw together. We'll get you warm, fed, and through the night. In daylight, we'll talk about what's next." She looked at him then. Really looked. As if cataloging the lines at his eyes, the scar along his jaw, the way his mouth thinned when he did not trust the air. She opened her mouth, shut it, then said, "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He pulled a battered kettle to the front of the stove. "I'm going to step out and check the lines. Rook will stay." The dog thumped his tail once. Cole buttoned his coat again and went to the door. The rain hit him like a crowd. He shook it off and stood on the threshold very still, letting his ears sort the sounds from the noise. The bell struck, the harbor answered, the ropes sang their low notes. Under it, faint and far, but there, an engine turned a smooth circle over water, too even for a storm night, too careful for a fool. He could not see it through the rain, but he could picture the lights hidden inside the low cloud and the pilot riding the wind with a steady hand. He closed the door on the weather and the sound both. Back at the stove, he poured water over grounds, and the smell of coffee changed the room. Maya had her hands out to the heat, palms spotted with goose flesh. Rook had moved closer to her knees without asking permission, and she did not send him away. "What bell is that?" she asked, listening to the strike. "Old lighthouse," he said. "She talks to us when the weather's bad." A small, tired smile, real despite the mess. "What's she saying now?" "Keep your head," Cole said. He handed her the mug. "And watch the water." Outside, the bell struck again, and far over the cove, the engine drew a careful line through the rain, like someone circling a place on a map before they came down. The lantern's flame steadied, and the shop began to feel like a room again, not a raft in weather. Cole hung his coat by the stove and set the kettle back where it would stay warm. Maya held the mug in both hands and watched the glass glow, as if the little sun inside the lantern might answer more than one kind of need. Rook shifted until his ribs touched the toe of her ruined satin shoe. He sighed and let the sound trail into the wood, like he owned the place. Cole pulled a shallow crate over and laid out bolts, a small brace, and 2 lengths of pine he'd planed the week before. He measured the gap from stool to floor, judged angle against strength, and set the first board to the vise. The plane whispered with each pass. Curled ribbons fell and stuck to his knuckles. He did not look at Maya while he worked, but he saw her in the edge of the lantern light. Shoulders climbing down out of fear, jaw loosening by half a click. He knew that climb. He had walked men off it with coffee and nonsense talk on nights uglier than this one. The door rattled twice, polite as a knock in a gale, and opened just enough for a slim woman to slip through sideways with the wind. Nora Chen shook rain out of her hood, closed the door against the push, and stood breathing a moment to swap sea air for oak smoke. "Heard the bell throw an extra note," she said, voice easy but eyes already doing their work. "Figured you were awake, Cole." And you were. She tipped her chin toward Maya. Evening. I'm a medic. Volunteer. Name's Nora. May I? Maya nodded, sudden shy under the blanket and the hulking coat. Nora's hands were warm and exact. She took a pulse, watched breaths, pressed along a muscle line above the hip with the kind of respect that admits pain without turning it into a story. She asked the questions that mattered and skipped the ones that didn't. Incision is old, Nora said. Healed clean, scar tissue tugging where the dress rubs. You brace with your arms like a pro. You can bear a little weight with a frame, yes? A little, Maya said. Not far, not long. That's enough for house to stool, stool to chair, and a bit more when you're stubborn. Nora smiled without making a fuss out of it. Any head knock? No. Good. Let's keep your core warm, then we'll swap that dress for something that doesn't drink the Atlantic. She shot Cole a look he'd known since grade school. It always meant go find the thing she was thinking but hadn't named. He went to the locker and brought back a thick flannel shirt and an old pair of sweats with a drawstring that still remembered its duty. He laid them near the stove and stood a little sideways so the lantern threw his shadow over the fabric, giving privacy you could breathe. Nora found a folded aluminum frame on the back wall and snapped the pins until it clicked at a height that fit. She tested the wobble, liked what she felt, then turned to Cole's boards with a raised brow. Ramp? Short run, he said. Shop to door, door to bench. She can ride the chair or take the frame and we'll spot. Good, Nora said. You think ahead when it counts. He thought of all the times he hadn't and left the answer alone. They moved slow and decent. Maya changed behind the screen of shadow and blanket, while Nora steadied and Rook held the doorway with solemn attention, like a sentry who understood modesty. When Maya came out, she looked 10 degrees warmer and 20 fewer pounds of ceremony. The veil lay folded on the bench, comb straightened and lace patiently tamed by Nora's hands. The dress, a wet wreck of silk and grit, hung from a hook to drip. For a moment, Maya put her palm flat on its bodice, the way people touch a door on the way out of a house they won't live in again. The kettle gave a small rattle against the stove ring, and Cole took the hint. He refilled her mug, then cut 3 slices of brown bread he kept for weeks like this, and set a tin of sardines beside it with a fork. He didn't say, sorry. He laid salt and a wedge of lemon and let a meal be what it was. She ate with tidy care, slow but steady. By the 3rd bite, the human color had come back to her face. The door rattled again. This time, a thinner knock, followed by a guilty, hey, it's just me. Eli slid in carrying a drone like a hen, prop guards wet and shining. 17 on good days, 14 when he forgot himself. He took 2 steps and stopped at the sight of the veil and the chair in Rook's eyes. Storm's throwing trash into the cove, he said to Cole, but he was looking at Maya. Figured you'd want someone to fetch if the line pops. We're set for the night, Cole said. What are you doing out? Working my scholarship, Eli said, and then seemed to remember his manners. Ma'am, I'm Eli. I live above the cannery. I can run messages if the radio goes stupid. My battery's full. I got eyes too. Nora took his sleeve and stripped a ribbon of seaweed off it like a mother cat. He means the drone, she translated, not the ones in his head. Eli, undeterred, set the drone on the bench, wiped his hands on his jeans, and leaned just far enough to see the chair's repaired rim. You trued that by feel? No gauge? Gauge is hanging right there, Cole said, nodding toward the hook. Hands are faster. Eli stared at the lantern. Saw something out there before the rain went heavy, he said, voice lower. Lights moving neat, not a lobster boat. Too smooth. Could be a seaplane lining itself up and then thinking twice when the squall smacked in. It circled. He drew a slow ring in the air over the bench, like it was saving the spot. Cole didn't look at Nora. Nora didn't look at Cole. The sound from last hour had already written that circle inside both their heads. Rook lifted his chin, as if scent and talk had finally drawn the same picture. Maya's hands tightened around the mug, the way people do when something finds them, even after they've stepped out of its path. She set the mug down and kept her fingers on the handle like a lifeline she could let go of and pick up again without anyone naming it. Could be Coast Guard, Nora offered, easy as a blanket. Shallow draft, riding the edge to keep an eye on anyone stupid enough to be stupid tonight. Could be, Eli said, and you could hear he didn't believe it. I'll keep ears on it. I got the harbor channel open. Cole went back to his boards, not because the ramp couldn't wait, but because the movement kept the room honest. He skimmed the last passes, chamfered the edges with a pocket knife, and set the run in place with 2 screws he could pull in the morning if he wanted the shop back to usual. He rolled the chair up and down once, then twice. The board hummed, the screws bit right, and he felt the quiet little pride that has nothing to do with applause. Nora checked Maya's feet for sensation and pressure marks, rubbed warmth into one instep with the heel of her hand the way you do for family, not work. You're doing better than you think, she said. Storm or no storm. Maya nodded and looked at Rook. He stayed with me, she said in a voice that surprised itself. When the car slid, he didn't leave the hood. Rook lifted one paw and set it on the rim of her wheel like he was signing the statement. Cole watched the line of Maya's mouth change shape when she smiled at the dog. It wasn't pretty in a movie sense. It was honest. It made something ease in his chest that hadn't eased all week. What were you doing on that road? Nora asked gently. In that dress, in that weather? Maya took a breath that had beginnings and endings in it. Leaving, she said. Then she put the word away, as if anything more would snap under its own weight. I thought I could make a turn before the worst of it. Always the way with storms, Nora said. They never ask our timing. She adjusted the blanket. You have someone to call? Someone safe? Maya's eyes dropped to the lantern flame and stayed there. Not tonight, she said. Not anyone I can think of who won't decide for me. That put a look on Nora's face Cole had seen when she stood between a patient and a pushy relative. Then you rest, Nora said. Here is fine. I'll be back at dawn. Alarms on my watch whether I want it or not. Eli hovered, wanting an order he could turn into speed. Cole gave him one. Check the south moorings and text Alma if the cannery float slips. Go home after that. Eli grinned like he'd been knighted, scooped his drone, and vanished into the rain. The door's rattle faded. Nora tightened the strap on the frame, traded a look with Cole that meant there were questions they would not ask until morning, and let herself out quieter than she'd come. When the shop settled a second time, it did so deeper. The storm had gone from mad to endless. The stove ticked in small metal answers. Cole poured more coffee and half a cup of hot water into it to smooth the edge. Maya closed her eyes and lifted the mug, breathing in the steam like it might rewrite the last 3 hours. There's a cot, Cole said. It's not much, but it's flat and it warms. We'll put it by the stove. Rook will patrol. He takes that seriously. Maya looked down at the dog, who stared back with a confidence that didn't demand anything in return. I can tell, she said. And then, as if the words had been waiting in a pocket, she added, Thank you for bringing me in. Harbor takes care of what blows in, Cole said. That's the work. He set the cot up and slid it close enough to the stove to keep a circle of heat, far enough to keep the blanket from smoldering. He brought out a second quilt that still smelled faintly of cedar. Maya used the frame with a practice that came from repetition and stubbornness, not heroics. He spotted, Rook braced without being told, and the three of them made a triangle you could have drawn on a paper. Steady, simple enough. Outside, the bell on the point spoke again, slower now, as if the keeper had gone to check the wick and come back with a better turn of it. Under the bell, far out where the dark had more room, an engine made a patient circle a man could almost set his watch by. Cole listened to it the way sailors listen to a bearing they know by heart. He did not tell Maya what he heard. He didn't need to. The way her fingers tightened on the blanket said she heard it too, inside the quiet where names don't do much good. Rook's ears shifted toward the sound, and then toward the door. He stayed put, but the message was there in the line of his shoulder. There would be another knock. Maybe not tonight, maybe not honest. The lantern burned on. The stove kept its low talk. On the peg above the bench, the veil dried into a softer shape. The card pinned under it, a damp wedding invitation with its ink gone to fog, curled at the corners like a leaf not ready to fall. Cole banked the fire just enough to last the hour, sat on the stool with his hands on his knees, and watched the rain bead and run on the window. He was not the praying kind. He did not make wishes out loud. But he counted the bell strokes and sent each one out over the water like a word a man can stand behind. Here, here, here. Dawn did not break so much as pale. The rain slid off to a sulk, and the harbor lay under a gray sheet that made the lighthouse bell sound larger than the world. Cole set a pot of oatmeal on the stove and stirred until it thickened, then dressed it with a thumb of butter and a scatter of raisins from a jar he rationed like a miser. Rook made his quiet rounds, nose to door, nose to window, nose to the wool cuff that had fallen from the cot. He nudged Maya's hand only when her breath changed from the deep pool of sleep to the lighter water of waking. Maya opened her eyes the way a person comes back from a long bridge. The flannel shirt made her look like she belonged to weather instead of fighting it. She sat up slow, hands sure on the frame, and glanced at the stove as if the smell of oats could pull her all the way to morning. "Eat first," Cole said. "Everything else after." She nodded and made room on her lap for the bowl. Her fingers shook for the first 2 bites, then steadied. She ate like someone trained by hospitals to be grateful for warm, plain food. When she finished, she set the spoon across the bowl and looked at the ramp he had built. "You did that in the dark," she said. "I had help." Cole tipped his jaw at Rook. "He supervises." Rook thumped his tail once, then settled his chin on his paws as if to say he'd done enough heavy lifting. Cole wheeled the chair to the edge of the new run and set the brakes. "Let's see what you and that frame can do with a spot," he said, voice mild. "No, hurry." Maya placed both hands on the frame and lifted, not with drama, but with craft. She shifted weight to her arms, braced, and made the small, clean move that counts. Cole stood close enough to make a fence out of his body if she slipped, not so close he stole the work from her. Rook rose and took the far side, chest to shin, a living wedge. They crossed the 2 feet from cot to chair, like men cross a narrow plank over honest water. Eyes forward, knees easy, faith set not in luck, but in practice. Maya let out a breath that was half relief, half pride. Cole set the brakes off and rolled her up the ramp. The board sang a low note under the wheels and settled back quiet. He turned her at the bench so she could look out the window and not at the dress still dripping from its hook. The veil had dried into a softer fall. each bead throwing a small, stubborn glint in the lantern light. The folded wedding invitation beneath it had curled into a shallow bowl, holding a dime of water as if even paper could learn to cup what it was given. "Where does this road point for you, once the sky remembers how to be blue?" Cole asked, fixing the last squeak out of the rim with a spoke key. "Back to the city for a day," Maya said, eyes on the window. "Then north again if I can manage it. There's a little harbor beyond Penobscot that still uses hand-cranked hoists. They need a safer dock. And a ramp down to the fish shed that doesn't ice up every first frost." "You run a dock committee?" Cole kept his tone light. "Something like that," she said. "I draw up plans, raise a little money, hire local crews when I can. It works best when the contract is in the town's name, not mine." "Not mine." He filed the phrasing. Rook lifted his head at her voice and let it fall again with a satisfied huff. Outside, the tide had turned. The boats rode a different angle. The rope songs changed key. Nora pushed in with a rush of cold air and a smile that made the room remember it was daytime. She checked pulse and color, unwrapped the blanket long enough to look for trouble, and wrapped it again with the calm of someone who believed in the body's will to mend. "You're ahead of schedule," she told Maya. "Storms push us, but sometimes they push us the right way. It helps when the floor is flat," Maya said, patting the ramp. Nora's gaze went to the repaired rim and back to Cole. "He's handy," she said. "Don't let him fool you. He'd sand the ocean if you gave him a wide enough board." Eli arrived with a paper bag from the diner and the breeze of a boy who had seen the whole town since sunrise. He set out scrambled eggs in a foam clamshell and a slice of pie that looked like summer. "Pear," he announced, as if it were a piece of intelligence from the front. "Told Mrs. Wade we needed the kind that feels like good news." Maya smiled and split the eggs with him. He launched into a harbor report with hand-drawn figures. The cannery float had held. Old Man Tucker's skiff had popped a cleat and been saved by a knot Eli said he'd invented on the spot. Nora arched an eyebrow at that. Eli blushed and downgraded the invention to a hasty borrowing. Rook, who did not eat eggs unless asked twice, accepted a small bite from Maya like a gentleman accepting a favor. He licked his nose, then cocked his head toward the bench where the veil hung. He stood, stretched, and trotted over. He sniffed the lace top to bottom, patient as a customs dog at an airport, and then paused at the edge where the comb met the fabric. His ears went up a notch. He made a low, thoughtful sound in his throat, then came back and sat so close to Maya's knee his shoulder touched the wheel. "What's that about?" Eli asked. He smelled the ocean in the fancy cloth. "Rook knows more perfumes than I do," Nora said. "Hospitals, cleaners, jet fuel, shrimp bait, cheap cigars, decent gin. He probably has a word for lace." Cole stood, crossed to the veil, and brought it down. Careful with the beadwork, he lifted the edge near his face and breathed in. There was salt and damp, yes, but underneath it a sweeter thing, not floral. Something like the clean bite of a hotel room that tries too hard to be no place. He set the veil back gently and wiped his hands on a rag, already stained with tar. "Anything?" Maya asked, watching his face the way people watch the second hand on a clock that means medicine time. "Just storm and starch," Cole said, which was not a lie, only not the whole of what his mind had marked. He did not like that there was a map in the smell he could not yet read. They spent the next hour on what any calendar would call nothing and what a life recognizes as the Maine of it. Cole sanded a splinter out of the frame's handle and wrapped the grip with a strip of leather soft as a good glove. Nora showed Maya a transfer trick she'd learned on an ambulance rig, a move that spared the shoulder without giving up control. Maya tried it twice and laughed the small, surprised laugh of a person who finds a door she thought was jammed. Eli tightened a loose hinge on the shop's side cabinet and told Rook in confidence that he was saving for a better camera. Rook listened like a saint and put his head on Eli's knee for punctuation. Between tasks, the quiet settled in like a cat finding a lap. Maya's face opened into something less guarded. She watched Cole shape wood, the long, even strokes that changed a rough edge into a safe one. Her eyes found his hands again and again. He felt the looking and did not resent it. A man can take being seen if the gaze is clean. "Why Rook?" she asked at last. "It fits." "Bird that remembers faces," Cole said. "Loyal and loud when it needs to be. Smart enough not to be cute about it." "And you?" Her voice was mild. "Why Port Harridan?" "Came home one day, and it was the place that would have me," he said. He turned the board, tested its face against his palm. "Harbor like a big hand. You get tossed, it catches." Nora stood, satisfied with the morning's small victories. "I'll be at the clinic for 2 hours," she said. "Text if you sneeze wrong. Alma's making rounds. The phone line's sulky, but it still rings when you heard it." After she left, the shop felt larger, the way rooms do when a competent person removes her gravity. Eli packed up his drone, hovered at the door, and pointed once at the sky. "Hear that?" he whispered. The engine was there again, farther off, then closer, like someone drawing a slow oval in fog and crossing their own wake without haste. Cole listened with his jaws set half a degree tighter than before. Rook's head turned toward the sound, then toward the veil, then back to Maya, as if aligning 3 points on a single chart. "Probably Coast Guard." Eli tried again, brave with youth. "Probably," Cole said, and the word sat on the workbench like a tool he might or might not need. Afternoon softened around the edges. The storm dragged its feet toward open water. Maya dozed and woke and dozed again, learning the shop's grammar: stove tick, rope song, saw whisper, dog sigh. At one point she asked for the frame and stood a heartbeat longer than before, only long enough to shift the blanket and pull the flannel straight at her hip. Cole spotted, Rook braced. The 3 of them made the move like a piece of music that had been practiced without sheet notes. She sank back into the chair with a wince that she smothered out of habit. Cole saw it anyway and let the seeing pass without comment. He pushed the chair to the window so she could watch the Whitcaps fall apart. From there she could see the bell tower when the mist lifted a little, and the gulls when they came low, surprised to find the world still here. "Do you ever get used to the sound?" she asked. "The bell?" He shook his head. "You don't want to. It's there to keep you honest." She looked at the veil again, then away. "Honest sounds hard," she said. "Easier than the other way," he said, and left it at that. Rook got up, crossed to the bench once more, and put both paws on the lower rung so he could reach the veil with his nose. He breathed in and sneezed, a sharp, offended note that made Maya jump and then laugh. He looked back at her, ears forward, as if to say he had registered a complaint with management. "Okay," Maya told him. "We'll tell the board." Cole folded the blanket tighter around her and checked the stove. Outside, the engine's oval widened, then faded, as if its pilot had marked the spot he wanted and gone to wait where patience looks exactly like absence. The tide turned again. The ropes changed key a second time. Small things tilted toward their next work. When evening crept in, Cole split a log and set it to catch, then sat across from Maya in the chair he used to mend nets. They did not. Talk about who might be circling or why. They did not talk about the smell on the veil that wasn't the sea. They spoke of how the new ramp would help get a toolbox to the door without a wheel catching, how the frame should ride in the truck so it didn't clatter, how oatmeal tastes better when you pretend it's pie, and pie tastes like a thing you earn. Rook slept and woke and slept again, each time closer to Maya's foot, as if guarding the part of her that touched the ground. Night came on clean. The lantern burned down to a smaller heart. Cole banked the fire for the second time that day and listened to the bell count off the hour. Before he climbed the stairs to the cot in the loft, he checked the door, then the window, then the door again. He looked at the veil and did nothing about it. Some questions have to wait for a better light or a worse storm. Maya adjusted the blanket and tucked her hands under her chin. She looked at Rook, then at Cole, and whatever she saw there let her shoulders drop the last inch into rest. Outside, the tide finished turning. Inside, small things kept their weight and did their quiet work. The harbor breathed in. The harbor breathed out. And somewhere beyond the point, a patient engine drew a last, tidy arc and drifted into the dark. By night, the harbor had that emptied-out feel, the kind that makes a man lower his voice without knowing why. The storm moved off like a sulking guest, and what it left behind was clean cold, and a sky rubbed thin enough to show one stubborn star over the bell tower. Cole doused the lantern to a modest glow and let the stove carry the rest. Rook took his post between door and cot, chin on paws, eyes half closed in the patient way that fooled nobody. Maya slept and woke in turns, riding the little waves of hurt and heat that follow a hard day. Once she asked for water in a voice that apologized for existing and took the tin cup like it was a promise. Cole handed it over and stood back out of reach of thanks. He checked the window again and saw his own face faint in the glass. Someone older than the man who had started this week. He looked down at Rook. The dog didn't move. He didn't need to. Near midnight came the soft scrape of shoes at the side door and a polite knock that would have been lost to wind if there had been any. Eli slid through carrying his drone under one arm and sheepishness under the other. "Didn't want to ring," he whispered. "The old buzzer screams like a gull." "You could have waited for morning," Cole said, but he set a second stool by the bench all the same. "Could have," Eli said, eyes bright with the kind of trouble that isn't mean. "You want to see what I saw before the rain shut me down?" Cole almost said no. Then he looked at Maya asleep, at the way her hand rested open on the blanket like a truce flag. And he nodded. Eli woke the tablet with a thumb, scrolled past a dozen small harbor dramas, and brought up a clip that made the room lean. The view was from just outside the shop window, canted a little, the drone hanging in the slow math balance of a boy with a knack. Inside the frame, the stove glowed. Rook stretched and sighed. And Maya. Maya pushed the blanket back, set both hands on the aluminum frame, and stood. Not long, not high. Long enough to roll the flannel straight at her hip and tug the blanket into better shape. Rook stepped tight to her shin like a brace built out of breath. Her mouth made a line of effort and triumph and something like relief. Then she sat. The whole sequence took 7 seconds. The clip ended on the slow settle of her shoulders, a private victory that would have been private if not for the kid with the clever bird. Eli watched Cole, waiting for a grin or a grunt or some sign he had delivered a miracle. What he got was quieter. Cole's face did the thing it did when pain and understanding changed places without shaking hands. He nodded once at the tablet, once at the sleeping woman, and once at Rook, who had lifted his head and was looking calmly between them. "How many people have seen this?" Cole asked. "Just me," Eli said. "I wasn't spying. I was flying a pattern like I said. The wind shoved me. I can trash it." "Don't," Cole said, and Eli blinked at the word. "Keep it close. Not cloud. Not anywhere a man with a password can knock down. You'll give it to Sheriff Alma if I ask. Not before." "Got it." Eli swallowed. "You met?" "Not at you," Cole said, which left the rest hanging. He stood and crossed to the ramp he had built in the dark. The board lay true, the screws snug, the edges sanded smooth for bare hands. He put a palm on the grain and felt the night he'd put into it. Then he reached for his driver, backed out the 2 screws nearest the door, and lifted the short run that took a wheel over the threshold. He set it aside gentle as a sleeping child. The gap it left was not big. It was enough to make a man think. Rook watched every inch of the movement and made no sound. Eli opened his mouth and shut it again. The kid wasn't slow. He had just learned more about adult hurt in 20 seconds than a year of school would teach him. He packed the drone away and slid toward the door. "I'll be around," he said, and meant it, and vanished into the thin cold. The quiet after he left had corners. Cole sat back down and let those corners press a little. He didn't wake Maya to tell her what he'd done. He didn't tell himself a pretty story about why. He banked the fire and took the loft steps with a tired leg and lay staring at the dark until the bell blessed him into 1 hour of sleep. Morning brought a white light that made the shop look like a photograph of itself. Frost traced the inside corners of the window, and the stove's heat made small rivers in the pattern. Rook nosed the cot and Maya's hand at the same time, sharing the job of bringing the room back to life. Culver Kelham poured oatmeal again because the body likes a habit. He set the bowls down and wheeled the chair toward the door without comment, then stopped where the short run had been. Maya saw it. Of course she did. She looked at the threshold, then at his hand on the push bar, then at his face. None of the looks asked for permission to hurt. None of them drifted to pity. Rook stood at her foot and put his chest against her shin like a reminder that ground is still ground, even when it changes shape. "I can step it," she said. Not pride, not dare, just the fact of it. "You can," Cole said, with a spot. They did it the careful way. Frame first, feet placed like a carpenter marks joists, hands firm where they needed to be and nowhere else. She took that small rise the way a person takes a hard truth, head on and without waste. When she sat again on the inside of the threshold, her breath came out in a slow ribbon that didn't ask to be noticed. Cole set the bowl on her lap, and they ate in a silence that had more in it than the night. Nora came early, sharp with cold and coffee. She shook her hood off and checked color and pulse, then the heel of Maya's hand, where a red crescent from the frame had raised its little flag. She was halfway through a lecture on padding grips when the door opened behind her and Sheriff Alma Brooks stepped in, hat in hand, coat dusted with salt. "Morning," Alma said, voice pitched low enough to respect rooms where sleep had just left. She had the carriage of a woman who'd been listened to for a long time and didn't waste it. "We had some visitors last night. Dockhand said 4 men tied off at the cannery float in the rain, no badges, no fish, no family names, and no business being there. They left before dawn. I don't like koi in a storm." Cole felt Rook's weight shift closer to Maya's foot. He kept his voice level. "You think they were local?" "I think they were looking for something and didn't find it where they thought it would be," Alma said. Her eyes did a slow lap of the room. The stove, the ramp board resting against the bench, the veil hanging by its comb like a relic from a church nobody went to anymore. You planning to tell me anything before I tell you what else I know? You start, Cole said. Alma lifted a shoulder, the law's version of a shrug. Seaplane was circling out past the point last night. Not Coast Guard. Tower got a tail number that matches a private charter out of Portland. Filed no landing but burned a neat oval worth of fuel. Folks with that kind of patience tend to be the kind with a name. Maya had gone very still. She put the spoon down and folded both hands on the blanket in her lap. "Sheriff," she said, her voice even. If a person had made the mistake of giving another person the right to make medical choices on her behalf during a time she wasn't good at making them, and if that paper had not yet been torn in two, would a circling, plane and men with no names be part of your day? It would, Alma said. Nothing soft about it. And if that person wanted my help undoing a bad signature, I'd say I have a pen and a judge who answers his phone. But I'd also say the other party might try to cash that paper before I get there. Nora's chin came up the way a nurse's does when someone moves her patient like furniture. "She's safe here," Nora said, "and she's not going anywhere she doesn't choose to go." Alma looked at Cole. "That right?" "That's right," he said. Rook stood and put a paw very gently on the rim of Maya's wheel. Not for show, not for court. Just to make the geometry of the room honest. Alma nodded once, satisfied and not satisfied. "I'll sit out in the cruiser a while and make the sort of calls that make men in suits clear their throats. If you see our nameless boys, you call me before you call your temper." She touched the brim of her hat to Maya in a gesture that didn't play at chivalry. "Ma'am." After she left, the room found a new balance. Not better, not worse, just truer. Nora wrapped the frame grip with a strip of foam and tape, like a gift the hand might actually want. Eli texted 2 words and a pin drop. "Saw tracks." Cole didn't answer. He pocketed the phone and looked at the ramp board against the bench, at the screws resting in the little dish by his tools, and at the gap by the door that had felt like principle at midnight and felt like something else now. Maya rolled to the window and stared a long time at the bell tower. When she spoke, it was to the glass. "I didn't lie about the chair," she said. "I lied about the part where a chair can be both a truth and not the only truth. That's on me." Cole listened to the way the words struck the wood and sank in. "I know what it looks like when somebody fakes a thing," he said. "That wasn't it." She let out a breath that trembled at the end, as if it had been holding for a very long set of seconds. "I was trying to be smaller than my shadow," she said. "Turns out shadows don't care." Rook made a small sound that wasn't quite a whine, more like a vowel a dog learns from living in a house full of people. He pressed closer until his vest brushed her calf. She put her hand in the curve of his neck and left it there. The room softened around that contact, the way cloth softens under warm water. Cole set the ramp back in place without a speech. He drove the screws down until the board hummed and settled. Then he stood up, wiped his hand on the rag, and looked at the door like he had just finished a job he had been hired to do by someone decent. From outside came the distant, even tone of an engine that had found its line again. It traced the same patient oval, the same neat geometry, as if somewhere in the gray, a man with a headset had drawn a circle around this shop and decided to memorize it. The bell answered on the half-minute. Alma's radio murmured in the cruiser like a neighbor thinking out loud. Nora stacked her kit and tied it shut. Eli's second text, unsent, waited in a draft he would keep to himself. Maya shifted in the chair and squared her shoulders. "If he comes," she said, "I'll say no where you can hear it." "I'll hear it," Cole said. Rook lifted his head and fixed on the door. His ears were forward, his body easy, his eyes bright. A dog measuring a quiet that had a crack running through it you could only see if you knew where to look. By noon, the harbor had the color of pewter and the kind of stillness that makes small sounds carry. The bell on the point spoke now and then, like an old friend clearing his throat. Cole was at the bench, shaping a thin strip of ash to use as a brace, when Rook's head came up so fast, the stool creaked under Cole's knee. A breath later, Cole heard it too. The clean, even thrum of a radial engine riding the gray at a sensible height, patient as a metronome. Alma's cruiser door thumped shut outside. She stood in the doorway a moment, hat in hand, eyes on the water. "That's not my Coast Guard," she said. "That's someone who paid cash and asked no questions." She looked at Maya. "You want this inside with me or outside with the town watching?" "Inside," Maya said. Her voice held steady. She set both palms on the push rims and turned her chair to face the door. Rook placed himself a foot in front of her knee and sat. Weight forward, eyes bright. The engine arced inland, fell off, then returned lower and closer until the gray itself rippled. The seaplane came out of the mist like a gull too sure of its wings, settled on the water with a soft slap, and drifted toward the cannery float. A deckhand hustled to take the painter. Two men stepped out, one tall and exact in a coat that had never met fish, the other broad across the shoulders with a boxer's quiet. The tall one took the dock like he owned docks. The broader one scanned without moving his head and filed the town in a glance. Alma stepped out to the porch as they came up the pier. Cole stood at her shoulder. The tall man smiled the way a billboard smiles. "Sheriff," he said, offering a hand she didn't take. "Damien Vale. We called ahead. You left a voicemail for a desk that doesn't answer to strangers," Alma said. "You're welcome to try again." Damien's smile widened a notch. He looked past Alma and fixed on Maya. Some men look at a person, and some look at a place they intend to stand. Damien looked like he intended to stand in any place he pleased. "Maya," he said, as if they had just been parted by a door someone else had closed. "Come on, weather's turned. We can make Portland by 2. Maya did not move. "I'm not going with you." Damien's eyes slid to the chair and away, a half-second calculation too tidy to hide. He turned to Alma again and removed a folder from the inside pocket of his coat. "Sheriff, you'll find papers here acknowledging my authority to make medical decisions for Ms. Laurent when she's unable to do so. She signed them last year after her accident. I'm simply exercising a duty of care." Alma didn't lift a finger. Cole took the folder without being asked and passed it to her. She flipped pages with the same neat care she used to hold a pistol. "These acknowledge authority when the physician says it's needed," she said. "I'm looking at a woman who can tell me her name and her intention without me having to guess at either. So no, Mr. Vale, you are not cashing this chit in my harbor." A shadow of annoyance crossed Damien's face. Then he rearranged it into charm. "You've misunderstood," he said. "I'm trying to spare her more discomfort. She's not in a position to—" "She's in a better position than you think," Nora said from the back of the room. She'd come in quiet as weather and now stood between stove and door, hands calm. "And she'll tell you herself." Maya's fingers tightened on the push rims. She reached to her right hand, twisted the plain ring that had ridden there through storm and morning, and worked it free. She set it on the bench beside the lantern, with the kind of care you use when you're putting down something that might bite. "I said no," she told Damien. "You heard me." Rook rose from his sit into a stand so smooth he seemed not to have moved at all. He took one step forward and set himself on the line between Damien and Maya, chest high, head level, ear tips barely forward. He did not show a tooth. He didn't need to. The room understood him just fine. Damien's gaze touched the dog and came back quick, not because he feared dogs, but because he disliked anything he had not priced. "You're making a scene," he said softer now. "You can't stay here. This is home enough for now," Cole said. Bootsteps rattled on the porch. A woman with a notebook and a windbreaker that had seen better protests stepped in, tucking hair behind her ear with ink-stained fingers. "Sorry," she said to Alma with a nod of respect. "Avery Monroe, Harbor Ledger. You can put me out if you need to, Sheriff. But I saw that plane and my editor's phone started ringing before it landed." "You can wait by the stove," Alma said without looking back. "You can write what you see. You can leave what you don't." Avery's eyes had already cataloged the ring on the bench, the ramp, the dog, the folder, the way Damien's shoes had picked up nothing from a working pier. She moved to the side like a woman who knew how to let a story happen in front of her without stepping on it. Damien shifted tactics. He turned slightly to the broader man. "Read," he said. "Show the sheriff the credentials." The big man, Reed, produced a badge from a private firm with enough metal to satisfy an airport and enough vagueness to mean anything. Alma glanced, grunted, and handed it back. "Mr. Monahan," she said, reading the small print. "You're in my county. Don't let your boss turn you into evidence." Reed's jaw moved once, a muscle along the cheek. He said nothing. His eyes had gone to Rook and stayed there, taking the measure of the dog with a kind of professional respect. Then he looked at Cole and did the same. He was a man who had stood in worse rooms and knew it. Damien pulled a step closer to Maya. Rook matched it without a sound. Cole took half a step himself, not drama, just geometry. Alma slid the folder into her coat as if she were tucking a ticket you can't buy with cash. "Last time," Damien said. "You're coming with me?" "No," Maya said. She did not lift her voice. She didn't have to. "You don't get to choose for me anymore." Silence laid itself over the room. Outside, a gull laughed at nothing. Avery's pen didn't move. Reed's eyelid flinched, small as a tell. Damien exhaled through his nose, and for the first time, let some heat show. He leaned toward Reed and spoke low, forgetting that rooms like this hold sound. "We need that safety file off the plant server before the auditors sniff it. If the ledger woman's here, Ashcroft will smell blood. Get the backup scrubbed." Avery's head tipped a fraction, a dog catching a whistle out of range. Alma's eyes cut to her. Cole felt the air change, the way it does when lightning decides to speak and hasn't yet chosen a tree. "You just moved this conversation to my side of the counter," Alma said, pleasant as pie. "Mr. Vale, you are welcome to sit on that stool and wait while I call the judge and an IT warrant. Or you can go back to your float and hope I don't get there before your man with the mop." Damien blinked, then smiled again, smaller now and with the corners tired. "Sheriff, you've misunderstood me twice today. I'm disappointed." "You can file a complaint on Tuesday," Alma said. "I'm busy until then." Maya's hand found Rook's neck without looking. Her fingers curled into the fur like a woman picking up a handle she could trust. Cole didn't take his eyes off Damien. He did not reach for a tool. He didn't have to. Everything he needed to say stood at his knee already. Reed looked at Damien, and then at the folder in Alma's coat, and then at the door. A man thinking about what follows what. He lifted his hands to show he was not about to make a bad move in a good county. "Sheriff," he said, first words all day. "If there are records you need before they go missing, you'll want them now, Not after I drive a man across town who's suddenly feeling tidy. His tone wasn't a betrayal. It was something older. It was a man stepping off a path half a shoe width to see where the ground gives. Alma nodded once, as if she'd been waiting for that tick on her clock. "You and I will take a ride," she said. "Mr. Vale can sit and think about how disappointment works." Damien's mouth made an O it had not made since prep school. He covered it fast with a different shape. "You think this is wise?" he asked Reed, voice sweet as antifreeze. "I think it's legal," Reed said, and didn't look at him. Avery backed toward the wall, getting the line of the room in one clean shot. The dog, the woman, the ring like a period on a sentence. The law between them and the man in the coat. She didn't smile. Good reporters don't when they get the frame they came for. Alma spoke into her radio, the sound of dispatch rolling out like a rope. She handed the folder to Cole with 2 fingers and a look that said, "Hold this the way you held a line in weather." He did. Damien watched the pass and did not hide his want. "Mr. Vale," Alma said lightly, "you step toward her again, and I will step on your day. Sit, watch your plane, enjoy our bell." Damien's jaw worked. He sat. He made it look voluntary. It fooled no one. Maya shifted her chair an inch and faced the window. Rook laid down where he had stood, still between her and whatever wanted in. Cole stood easy by the bench, one hand on wood, one eye on trouble. Outside, the seaplane bobbed on a tide that did not care who owned what. The bell struck. The harbor answered. And in that breath between notes, the town chose a side and meant it. Evening laid a blue hand across the harbor and pressed until the day's talk went flat. Alma drove off with Reed riding shotgun, a warrant blooming in the wires between cruiser and courthouse. Damien waited on the stool the way a cat waits on a doorstep that isn't his. Avery stood by the stove, making herself small, eyes working the room like a loom. Nora cleaned up what could be cleaned, then touched Maya's shoulder once and left with a nod that meant she would be a phone call away and a block near. The bell at the point found a slower rhythm. The seaplane rocked against the float as if sleep were a thing for machinery. Rook eased from his guard post to the edge of the rug and laid his chin on his paws. Body relaxed, eyes bright. Cole set water to heat again, because hot water is a way to keep a room honest. Maya held her mug like the old woman down the street held her rosary, not for show, but for steadiness. Damien tried for small talk and got no takers. He studied the ring on the bench and the line of Rook's back and the shape of Maya's jaw and misread all 3. When he tired of failing to be liked, he looked out the window and pretended the tide belonged to him. Avery slipped closer to Cole as the kettle whispered. "You ever think," she murmured, "that days like this are what towns are for?" "Towns are for fixing what breaks," Cole said, not unkind. "Some days that's a plank, some days it's a person." He poured hot water into 2 cups and passed one to Maya. The steam made a brief halo over her hands. She drank and let the heat talk, her bones into staying. Outside, a truck rattled over the planks of the pier and stopped short. Rook's head came up, not alarmed, attentive. Cole moved to the door with a man's natural slowness when he means to arrive on time, not early. Reed stepped in out of the cold and shut the door behind him with his heel, as if he were keeping weather out and something worse. The cruiser's taillights washed the dock red and went on toward the cannery, Alma's voice a thread on the radio. Reed's coat carried the smell of wet wool and road dust. The boxer's quiet was still there, but it had a new line running through it. The line men get when they choose and know it. Damien half rose. "You forget something?" he asked, sweetness back like poison in a jar. Yeah, Reed said. He didn't look at him. He looked at Cole. You got a minute at the pier? Cole glanced at Maya, then at Rook. 2. They stepped out into air that felt recently washed. The wharf clicked and creaked underfoot. Rook came as far as the threshold and sat there, front paws just on the line, as if he understood that what needed saying wanted the night around it. The seaplane eased against its rope. The low flats smelled like kelp and tin. Reed stood with his forearms on the rail, a big man trying to take up less space without disguising he could take more. He kept his voice level. I was on the plant security contract the night the scaffold went down, he said. Budget had been cut by a person who doesn't swing a hammer. 2 guards where there should have been 4. Fewer eyes, slower response. He watched the water as he spoke, not because he was ashamed, but because men like him measure themselves against things that don't lie. I wrote it up. Management rewrote it. The revised report said high winds and operator error. Wind was a 10-knot whisper. Operator was a good man with a new baby. And you stayed, Cole said. Not a challenge, a fact. I stayed until the check bought my silence, Reed said. Found out it was my silence I'd sold. That's different. He turned his head then. Sheriff's pulling logs. If the server's already been scrubbed, that means someone took a trip across town to hit the backups. Vale doesn't have the guts to do his own mopping. He's got boys for that. Cole listened to the night name each piece. Rope rub on wood, float slap, the far laugh of a woman leaving the diner with a man who'd tell the story later like he'd planned it. Why tell me? He asked. Not her. Because you'll act on it before the ink dries, Reed said. And because your dog already measured me and didn't come up with empty. Rook, at the door, made a small huff as if to allow the compliment. Cole rested his hands on the rail where the paint had worn to the grain. What else? I copied the real report the night I turned it in, Reed said. Kept the paper in a safe my boss doesn't know exists, and the drive in a place nobody looks twice. Gran taught me to keep back a dime from every dollar I made. Turns out that math works on truth, too. You have it with you. In the truck, Reed said. Not on your bench with Mr. Smile looking at it. They turned back toward the shop. From the shadow under the pier, a muffled putter shook free of the usual noises. Cole stopped dead, head cocked. Rook had already come to his feet, weight forward, nostrils wide. Under the dock, low and quick, a skiff engine coughed, settled, and then cut. A slap of something heavy met water, then another. 2 men in slickers came up the ladder on the far side of the cannery float, quick hands, heads down, moving like a job timed by a stopwatch. Reed's voice was thin with disgust. Dumping, he said. Not fish. Eli's text arrived in Cole's pocket like a tapped shoulder. South ladder, 2 guys, bags. Cole didn't look down. He stepped back into the shop, quiet as weather turning. Alma, he said to Avery, who had her phone halfway out. Pin south ladder. 2 men, dumping bags. She sent it without asking why she was his messenger. Good news folk don't slow a rope you've thrown. Maya had gone white around the mouth. Damien sat very still, the way men sit when they're taking inventory of exits. Rook moved to the door, shoulders rounded, tail relaxed, but ready. Cole pulled the lantern down a notch and took his jacket off the peg. He handed the jacket to Maya, not because she needed it, but because the act of handing and taking would put her hands on something warm. Stay with Avery, he said. Rook stays with you. Rook didn't move. Cole touched 2 fingers to the dog's vest, and then Maya's hand. Guard, he said. The word had more in it than its 4 letters. The dog shifted his weight to a place that made a line between her and the world. He didn't take his eyes off the door. Out on the wharf, the cruiser's blue wash painted the pilings. Alma came in quick from the cannery road, one unit behind her, a young deputy with eyebrows like question marks, but his pistol low and right. She took one look at Cole and Reed and didn't bother to rehearse. South ladder? 2 men, Cole said. Bags. Wish I had a K9, the deputy muttered. You do, Alma said, and tipped her head toward the doorway where Rook stood like a statue of an old story. Not in my squad, Cole said. He's working a different post. Alma grinned without teeth. All right, she said. Reed, you on me. Cole, you're a witness with good shoes. You see something dumb, you name it before it happens. They took the pier in a line that looked casual to anyone not looking. The south ladder creaked under the weight of one more man coming up for air. He froze halfway when he saw Alma's hat. The bag in his hand swung heavy with whatever doesn't belong in water. He considered a drop, thought better, lifted it slow, like that would make it lighter. The second man stepped back into shadow and tried to grow into the piling. Evening, boys, Alma said. Pleasant as a Sunday. You out for a walk with the town's property? The first man's mouth opened and produced a lie bad enough to get him charged for cruelty. Reed took 2 steps left and cut the angle. The deputy held the light steady. Cole watched hands, not faces. The bag hit the deck with a thump. Inside, under plastic and tape, the tight, square shapes of drives and binders shifted. The label on one binder read, Audit, in the tidy font of a printer that hadn't expected to do this kind of work. The second man made his choice and bolted. He got 3 strides and ran into Reed's chest, which is what happens when a man chooses badly and physics gets a vote. Reed turned him like a big brother turns a boy who forgot his manners, careful and complete. Alma cuffed them, read them words, and smiled into the dark. Send a note to your boss, she said. Tell him our bell's loud enough to wake the paperwork. They walked the 2 men past the shop. Damien stood when he saw the bag and sat when he saw Alma see him. Avery's pencil moved like rain. Maya's fingers had left the mug to rest on Rook's collar, not clinging, resting. The dog kept his head high, his body easy, the way an animal does when the thing to be done is finally being done. Reed went to his truck and brought back a small gray safe that looked like it belonged to a motel and weighed like it belonged to a bank. He set it on the bench and spun the dial with the kindness only a man who likes machines shows. Inside, in a plastic sleeve, sat a thick envelope and a drive wrapped in tape with a name written in Old Lady Neat, L. Monahan. Grant, Reed said, almost smiling. She labeled everything like a pantry. Avery looked, then looked away, understanding that you don't burn a source by looking too hard at the names. Alma slid the packet into a bigger bag, initialed a strip of tape, and nodded to Reed in a way that did not say thank you, and said it anyway. Damien cleared his throat. This is absurd, he said to the room at large. You're making a carnival out of a misunderstanding. You misunderstand what a county does when someone tries to drown its ledgers, Alma said. He turned to Maya, reaching for softer ground and finding none. You don't know what you're starting. I know what I'm ending, she said. He reached for the ring without meaning to, then stopped himself because he did not want to be seen wanting. He smoothed his coat, the kind of gesture men use when they've just realized that they've been seen all the way through, and went to the door. Alma blocked it with the ease of a woman who always fits the doorway. You can sit until I finish my errands, she told him. Or you can sit at the station, Either way, you're sitting." He sat. Outside, the tide swung toward slack and then past it. Eli's message buzzed again. A photo this time from under the pier. The wet shine of a third bag snagged on a beam, just out of reach. Cole forwarded it to Alma with one thumb. She nodded to the deputy, who went to fetch a hook. The shop settled again, but it was a different settle. The way a house feels after you've found the leak and put a pan under it. Maya eased her chair closer to the stove. Rook repositioned to match, his side against her foot. A warm weight that said more than speeches ever could. Cole leaned a hip against the bench and let the heat find the cold places in his hands. In the lull between siren and paperwork, between charge and court date, between seaplane and handcuff, the harbor breathed like a tired animal. Big in, big out, no drama. Reed stood by the door a long moment, like a man assessing whether a bridge would hold. He looked at Maya without staring. "You did right," he said simply. "There's a lot of daylight between hard and wrong." She nodded once, grateful for a sentence that didn't ask her to perform gratitude. "Thank you for the envelope," she said, "and for the math." He blinked, then laughed once, quiet, like a man surprised by the rightness of being known. Gran would be pleased. The bell on the point spoke again, not louder, not softer, just certain. Alma's radio chattered with the business of tying one day to the next. The deputy came back wet to the elbow and triumphant with the third bag. Avery made a neat note and shut her book with a soft slap. Damien found a way to look bored and achieved nothing. Cole took the ramp with his boot and felt its give and was glad he had set it back. He looked at Rook, who looked at him and then at Maya and then at the door, as if to say the geometry still held. For tonight, it did. "Get some rest," Alma said at last, the command braided with kindness. "I'll be back when the judge has inked the page." She went, taking the night's racket with her. The seaplane bobbed like a toy someone forgot to put away. The cruiser's sound receded down the road. Rook stood, stretched in that long ripple dogs do when the worst of a day has ended, and circled once before settling with his chest against Maya's shoe. Cole banked the fire. The shop dimmed to the kind of light that knows how to keep secrets without making them. He checked the door, checked the window, and counted the bell twice for good measure. Maya's shoulders dropped the last inch they had been holding. Outside, the tide turned again. Inside, the dog slept with one ear up. And far out past the point, where patience and distance look a lot alike, a careful engine drew a new oval and waited. Morning came thin and honest, the kind of light that leaves no corners for a lie to curl up in. The bell on the point kept its slow count. The shop smelled like coffee and oak smoke and a new day trying to be better than the last. Rook made a lazy circuit of the room, nose, two-door, nose to window, nose to Maya's sleeve, and came back to sit at her foot like a man punching the clock. Alma returned with the stamp of court still on her. She set a paper grocery bag on the bench like she was bringing muffins when what she had might change the ground under their feet. "Server logs," she said. "And 2 backups the boys forgot weren't in the same closet as the one they scrubbed. Turns out our plant doesn't hire geniuses." Reed followed her in with a thermos and the look of a man who had slept in a chair and made it count. Avery took a spot by the window, notebook open, body small, eyes wide. Cole poured coffee for whoever reached for it first. Maya put her palms on the push rims and faced the bench as if it were a judge. Alma pulled envelopes and drives out of the bag, each sealed, each signed across the tape. She handed one to Avery. "You can look while I talk. Don't publish a blessed line until I tell you what happens next." Avery nodded and slid papers out the way a librarian handles first editions. She read in quick, tidy swallows. Her eyebrows climbed once, then again. "You've got transfers," she said. Plantavale's shell to a consulting LLC that bills for safety assessments it never made. Money washing up in accounts that look like prize turkeys. And here, she tapped a page. A cut to a private foundation that spends the rest of it on little coastal towns that woke up needing a dock rebuilt. Reed's mouth pulled into a shape that wasn't a smile. "That the Harbor Light Foundation?" "It is," Avery said. "Out-of-state donor-advised blind? No board list on file. Very tasteful logo. It's been writing checks steady for a year and change. I've got line items. Wheelchair ramp for a fish shed in Booth Bay, hoist retrofit in Castine, float replacement in Harridan." She stopped, looked at Cole, then at Maya. "And one more," she said softer. "A payoff request to Cormac Bank for a mortgage listed under Harrington Marine." Cole felt it first in his hands. Heat left his knuckles and walked up his arms to his jaw. He looked at Maya. She held his gaze, steady as a rock, even as the color bled from her mouth. She didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She just sat in her chair and faced what the morning had brought. "I didn't want you trapped by a note someone boasted about buying for pennies," she said. "I didn't want your shop used to make you quiet. The bank was ready to package it with 3 others and sell it to a fund that belongs to Damien in a zip code 2 states over. I moved first." "What do you think that makes me?" Cole asked, not loud, not kind. "A project?" "It makes you a man in a house that needed the roof fixed before the next rain," she said. "I didn't put my name on it. I wasn't going to tell you at all if there was any other way to keep you clear." Rook stood and slid between them, not to block, just to be there. Chest against Maya's shin, head angled toward Cole with the calm of an animal who knows everything worth saving comes down to breath, shared in the same small room. Alma lifted a hand, palm down, asking the floorboards for one more minute of patience. "There's more," she said. "Reed?" Reed set his thermos down and spoke like a man reading his own ledger. The scaffold wasn't wind. It wasn't operator error. It was a budget cut put through by a man who signs things and never stands under them. "I filed the first report. They filed another. I kept mine. Sheriff's got it now." He looked at Maya. "You took the hit that kept the lawyers off the men who needed to work. That wasn't right. We're going to make it right." Maya's hand found Rook's collar without looking. The dog didn't move. He didn't have to. Avery cleared her throat. "One more line," she said, and laid a page flat. Harbor Light didn't just write checks. It insisted each project be titled to the town or the co-op. No naming rights, no plaques, no ribbon photos. Someone wanted the fix, not the credit. Cole stared at the paper like it might blink and admit a trick. It didn't. He stood up and walked to the door because he needed the air. Out on the pier, the tide leaned. The seaplane bobbed like an apology. He touched the jam with his fingers and felt the grain. It steadied him enough to come back in. "Here's how this goes," Alma said, voice back to business. "I'm charging Vale on obstruction, attempted destruction of records, and whatever my county attorney can hang his hat on after lunch. If your detective friends upstate like what they see on this money trail, they'll call it fraud and wire. Avery will sit on what she knows until it keeps rather than spoils. Reed will walk with me to the plant and point at doors before boys with keys can pretend they lost them. Cole will do the thing he does best and keep a room square while the roofers work. And Ms. Laurent?" Maya lifted her chin. "Maya is fine." "Maya," Alma said, We'll make 2 phone calls, one to the judge to revoke her medical proxy, the other to whatever bank clerk's desk controls whatever this foundation is. She'll tell them that any relief to this harbor will be contracted through a board I can seat 5 people on before supper, and that not a dime will run through a line that touches Mr. Vale. Maya nodded. Agreed. And the mortgage, Cole said, more statement than question. Maya looked at him and didn't look away. If you want it back on your books, it's back by noon, she said. With interest. I don't need you to owe me. I needed you not to owe him. He stood very still. The words landed in him and did their slow work. He did not say thank you. He did not say no. He let the tide inside him turn until it found something like level ground. Rook's ears flicked. A new sound had cut under the day's voices. A little tick not from stove or clock. He rose and moved to the porch, nose down, tail held in a straight line, body pointed like a compass needle that had just remembered north. Cole was on his heels without a word. Reed came behind him, a shadow that knew what to look for without knowing yet what it would be. Under the porch, where the stringers made a rib cage out of the wharf, something metal knocked wood in a regular way that didn't belong. Rook froze, one paw lifted. He looked back at Cole and then stared at the gap between pilings as if sight could carry through plank. Cole lay on his side and reached his arm into the dark. His fingers met a wrapped bundle the size of a shoebox, tape tight, wire tidy, the kind of tidy that meant a man had sat dry while other men got wet. He pulled back fast and closed his fist on air. Don't touch, he said, the 2 most useful words in a bad minute. Alma was there before the next breath finished. Radio alive. Voice calm. Out, she said to everyone who didn't need to be on the porch. Back wall, away from glass. She crouched by Cole and looked without reaching. Timer, she said, and then said nothing you could print. Deputy, call Bangor EOD. You tell them it's clean work and close to a fuel line. Reed studied the bundle from a distance. Only men who have seen such things can judge. He took his hands off his hips and put them where Alma could see them. We can make it wait, he said. Tape the switch, pin the line, buy time for the unit. Or we can pick up what used to be my pier with a shovel, Alma said. She looked at Cole. That's your fuel drum. It is, Cole said, and I like it where it is. He looked at Rook. The dog held his stare and then moved back 3 paces on his own, as if he understood yield had its rightful place. Inside, Maya had rolled to the back wall like a soldier following orders, Avery beside her, with knuckles white on her notebook. Cole heard their quiet, heard the stove tick, heard the whole harbor lean toward the sound under his porch. EOD said 20 minutes. 20 minutes can be a lifetime or a blink. Alma set a perimeter that looked like nothing to anyone without eyes for tape and angles. She sent the deputy to hold the south end and keep townsfolk at gossip distance. She, Cole, and Reed stayed on the boards and let the air sit still around the box. Rook watched the wire. The way only dogs watch a single thing so completely, the rest of the world falls off the edge. Cole kept his breath slow and even like a man lying to his own body about what comes next. Reed named each part he could see without touching. Mercury switch, he said. Simple timer, cheap battery, fresh. Whoever said it had a YouTube degree and a good hand. Which can kill you same as a doctorate, Alma said. The minutes stacked. The bell out on the point counted 3, and then 4, and then 5. The EOD truck came in quiet. Men in thick suits that made them look like unfriendly turtles moving faster than you'd think. Alma briefed in a dozen clean words. One tech slid under the porch on a board like a mechanic under a car, hands as steady as Sunday. He cut the line, taped the switch, backed out, and held the wrapped box like a mother holds a sleeping baby. Secure, respectful, aware of the weight. He passed it to the second tech, who put it in a container that looked like a steel drum married to a vault. "Not art," the tech said, "but solid enough. Would have made a mess of your morning." Alma let out a breath that made her 5 years younger for 1 second. "Chain of custody," she said, "and a copy of your report from my county's wall." The tech nodded and left the way he came. Quiet, certain. People on the road stared and then pretended they hadn't. The harbor took the event and made it old in the way only water can. Inside, Maya's hands trembled and then stopped. Rook went to her and put his head under her hand so she could find stillness on something warm. Cole leaned against the jamb and felt the grain again. He looked at Alma, then at Reed, then at the place under the porch where a bad morning had been folded and carried away. "Vale?" Avery asked, not lifting her pen. "Maybe," Alma said. "Maybe not. Men like him hire men who hire men. But he flew in with a plane and a folder and a temper on the same day someone taped a box to my pier. A jury likes a clean calendar. Damien had the good sense not to speak. He had the bad sense to try the door. Alma gave him a look that put him back in the chair without a hand. "You can go now," she told him, sweet as salt. "But not out of town. I've got a few more questions I want you to answer without a lawyer telling you how honest sounds." He left without the smile. The seaplane's pilot saw him coming and did not bother to look happy about it. The engine coughed once, twice, then caught. The plane rode the chop like a bowing horse and clawed into the gray with an eagerness that said it had given up on this county for the day. Alma watched it lift off and then turned back to the room she'd been holding together with tape and grit. "All right," she said. "Maya, make your calls. Cole, get me the contact for the bank that thought your note looked good in a bundle. Reed, you and I will keep walking until we run out of doors to open." Maya dialed, spoke in a voice that belonged to a woman used to making rooms quiet, and undid her own mistake in 3 calm sentences. The judge answered. The proxy died. The bank heard her and put a hold on a transfer that would have taken the shop out of Cole's hands by Wednesday. The foundation clerk cried a little and promised the next check would be cut to the town, not to any man's name. Cole stood by the bench and turned the ring on the wood with 2 fingers. He wasn't trying to make it shine. He was measuring its weight against what the day had, laid in his palms: a mortgage, a bomb, a ledger, a dog with his head under a woman's hand. When Maya finished her calls, he lifted his eyes and found hers. "I'll carry my own note," he said. "You keep the foundation pointed where it was always meant to point." "Done," she said. He set the ring on the invitation like a full stop. Rook made a sound so soft you almost had to lean to hear it. The sound a working dog makes when his people finally set a thing down in the right place. The bell struck. The harbor answered. And between those 2 notes, for the first time in a long while, the room felt like a place you could breathe easy without having to explain why. The next morning was clear in the way the coast sometimes is after it's scared you for a week. Sky rinsed blue, wind clean as a church floor, gulls working the flats like they owned stock. The bell at the point sounded almost cheerful. Cole opened the big doors of the shop and let the day walk in. Rook padded out, took one long breath of sunlight, and came back to sit with his shoulder against Maya's wheel like he was clocking in for a shift he enjoyed. Alma arrived first, hat tipped back, a docket tucked under her arm. She had the look people get when they've slept 4 hours and made all 4 count. "Judge signed," she said. "Warrants for the plant, warrants for the shell companies, and a polite invitation for Mr. Vale to enjoy our hospitality while we count. State boys want a word about that box under your pier." She set the docket on the bench and looked at Maya. "Your proxy's dead. The paper says what you say now. If anyone circles again, I'll be the one waving." Reed showed a few minutes later with a toolbox, and the kind of grin that happens to a man only after he's told the truth and found out the floor held. He took a place at the end of the bench like he had stood there his whole life, hands flat, eyes steady. "Plant server coughed up more than it kept down," he said. "Backups had backups. Funny thing about liars, they file." Avery came last. Running on black coffee and joy, she was hiding on purpose. She stood by the door in case anyone decided to pretend this day wasn't happening. "Editor says I can file when Alma says the clock is set," she told Cole. "No names you don't want named. Faces only if they're holding public office or public trouble." The town drifted by in 2s and 3s, pretending they had errands. Old Man Tucker leaned on the pier rail so hard it squeaked and announced to no one that the sky was finally worth the price of living. Mrs. Wade sent over a plate with 2 lemon squares and a note that read, "You're thin? Eat." Eli planted himself on the steps with his drone off and his eyes on, the way kids sit when they know history is tired of being quiet. At 10 after 10, a black sedan nosed down the Cannery Road and pulled up to the float with the kind of care money buys. Damien stepped out in a different coat that didn't help. He looked smaller in the big morning. 2 state investigators and a county attorney climbed out behind him wearing government faces. Alma met them halfway across the pier. Papers changed hands. Voices stayed calm. Damien signed what he was told to sign and did not smile when he tried. He turned once toward the shop window and froze. Maya had turned her chair to face the door. Rook stood between them, easy and unmovable. Damien's mouth made a shape like a man tasting a word he didn't much care for. The attorney touched his elbow. The sedan pulled away without fuss. The harbor breathed out, not relief so much as oxygen. Work started because that's what towns do after fire drills. Alma and Reed left with the investigators. Avery perched on the end of the bench and copied dates as if sorting nails by length. Eli ran sandwiches up and down the pier and reported on the bell every quarter hour like it was his job. Maya watched it all with her hands easy on the push rims, face softer than it had been since the storm. She waited until the shop thinned, then nodded toward the coil of rope hanging by the door. "You still splice by hand," she said. It wasn't a question. The coil was old Manila, 3-strand, long as a story. "Best way to learn your own weight," Cole said. He took the coil down and flaked it on the floor, then fetched a length that had been whipped at both ends. "We'll make something that won't slip." He set a stool by the wide doorway so Maya could see the water while his hands worked. He measured 2 fathoms and a bit, laid out the strands, and opened the twist with a marlina spike that had belonged to his father. The shop quieted around the motion. Rook lay with his chin on his paws, watching the tuck and turn like it was a game he knew the rules for. Maya leaned forward a fraction. The way people do when music they like starts without warning. Cole talked while he worked, not because the splice needed talk, but because a town sometimes does. Back splice gives you a fat end that won't fray. Short splice keeps strength when you join 2 lengths. I splice. He formed the loop against the bench leg. That's what you trust when you want to tie a thing to your life and still untie it later. He passed the tail under, over, under again, fingers sure. Most folks try to rush. Rope doesn't like hurry, same with people. Maya smiled, small and real. Sounds like a sermon I could sit through. He finished the last tuck and rolled the splice under his palm until it went smooth. He handed the loop to her. It fit her hand the way good tools do, without argument. She turned it, weighing it like she could hear the fiber's story. "Feels honest," she said. "It is," he said. From the doorway came the quick knock of a woman who had never learned to fidget. Alma stepped in with Reed and two new faces. The county attorney and a state detective wearing a suit that knew newspapers. Signatures found paper, words found air, and the day changed shape for the last time. Alma gave the bare facts. Charges, custody, conditions. No borders crossed without a call. The detective shook Cole's hand like they might need each other later. The attorney thanked Maya in a sentence that didn't make a fuss and told her she had done right by strangers. Then they were gone again, pulled down the road by duties that don't wait. "Not every day ends clean," Alma said at the door. "We'll take one when it does." She touched the brim of her hat to Rook. "Good work, officer." Rook's tail thumped like a man who didn't mind the joke. Afternoon warmed as much as January lets it. Cole set a plank on sawhorses and unrolled a set of drawings Maya had been carrying since before the wet dress and the bad night. Ramp to the fish shed, revised slope. New cleats spaced for old hands. Handrail at a height that matched Nora's notes. Simple, stout, with no edges to catch a wheel. They looked at the lines together and moved a pencil half an inch, then a quarter, then nodded. Eli watched like a boy who had found out plans make things real. Avery packed her notebook at last and stood in the doorway. "I'll write it with the names that need naming and the ones that don't," she said. "The headline won't sell papers like a plane in a storm, but it'll sit right." She started to go, then turned back. "If you two ever let me tell the long version, I'll do it slow and true." "We'll see," Cole said. "Some stories fish better in quiet water." When the town thinned to its usual hum, Cole went to the pegboard and took down the old cedar box he hadn't opened in a year. Inside lay the bank papers wrapped in brown twine, a dented pen, and a small cloth bag with a handful of coins he'd kept out of habit. He set the stack on the bench and turned to Maya. "You said to put the note back on my books," he said. "Let's do it the simple way. Alma can witness. The bank can check their wires and file their pride." Maya looked at the papers, then at him. "All right," she said. "But I want the first payment to go to the co-op as a donation. Consider it interest I can live with." He held her eyes a long second and nodded once. "Fair." Rook got up, went to the door, and looked back, head tilted, the way he did when he knew the next move belonged to humans, and he was ready to help with the part that had fur. Cole took the new splice, looped it through a ring in the doorframe, and handed the free end to Maya. She held it. He took the other end and pulled until the loop came snug. The rope creaked, stretched, and settled into itself. He tied off. She did too, a clean half-hitch that would hold until asked to let go. "Come on," he said, voice gone easy in a way it hadn't been in years. "Come inside, it's still cold." They rolled back into the warm, the three of them. A man who'd learned the cost of standing, a woman who'd chosen to sit and still move the ground under her, and a dog whose job description was simple and perfect. The stove ticked. The bell at the point gave a slow note and another. On the wall above the bench, the damp wedding invitation, flattened now, edges pressed, sat under the clipped drawing of the new ramp. Someone, maybe Eli, maybe nobody, had slid the plain ring onto a thumbtack and left it there like a punctuation mark that had found its sentence. Evening laid itself over the harbor without hurry. Lights came on in the cannery windows. Boats turned their noses the same way. Alma's cruiser rolled past once more and went on. Reed's truck idled, then left. Avery's taillights winked at the bend. The day folded down to fit a room. Cole poured coffee and cut the lemon squares Mrs. Wade had sent. Rook pretended he didn't like lemon and then accepted a corner with dignity. Maya laughed and shook her head at the dog and at the man and at the way a town can hold you when you think you've made yourself too small to be held. She set her palm on Rook's neck and left it there. Outside, the tide turned again toward morning. Inside, a new splice held, a rope's memory knitting strength into what had been two ends. The bell spoke once in the blue hour, certain as a heartbeat. Cole stood, felt the sound move through the floor and up his bones, and let it be what it was. A promise you don't need to say out loud to believe. Before you go, weigh in with one tap. Comment 0 if you think Cole should keep the shop's note himself. Comment 1 if the harbor board should hold it till spring. And if Rook earned your heart today, drop a hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next true-hearted story. New chapters of courage, loyalty, and second chances are coming. Stick with us for the journey.